Repetition as concealment, manipulation through authority, and media as the ultimate vehicle for shaping public consciousness. It's the most insidious form of control because it doesn't look or feel like control. It looks like normalcy. It's a slow burn, a fog that settles over everything until people can't see past it anymore. Repetition doesn't make something true. However, it can make it believable over time. Once you hear something often enough, especially from someone in a position of authority, it can become undistinguishable from truth in your mind. So, and this is something too that even the AI is prone to. Repetition makes right. So, yeah, I'm just going to continue with the written portions. The media and all its derivatives, from news outlets to social media to even AI-generated narratives, has become the lifeblood of this strategy. But it's not just the media. The media is the environment. The media now is the environment, but it is the environment. It's not just the media. Everywhere that you're going, you're being saturated with what is a big lie. And it should become apparent as you think about it by the sheer number of hypocrisies and inconsistencies that emerge over and over and over again thematically throughout our society. So if we embrace the notion of communication as an emergent dimensionality, all right, and then if we also add on to that, or if we incorporate into that a lot of these conclusions that Gilles Louis René Deleuze Gilles Louis René Deleuze. So essentially, and I think that this is starting to bear out more and more, specifically in this conversation, I am speaking of his works about, oh my gosh, what does he call it? Capitalism and Schizophrenia, Anti-Oedipus. So, I'm not saying that Freud, Nietzsche, all these guys, they're not a conclusion, they're a step. And they're a step in the same direction as Jesus Christ. If you can really start to peel back what's going on in the minds of all these people, if we develop further these notions, we can start to see the self-evident nature of what I'm trying to say, which is that our reality has an emergent nature. And therefore there is a fluxus to it that is limited by the current practice of science. Not only that, but there is an inherent bias in our scientific method that is continually not recognized, which is the bias inherent in the hypothesis. Truly and purely observational information could arguably be more valuable than any experimental information because of the bias of hypothesis. I'm not suggesting that science is not valid or valuable, but I am suggesting that there are alternative ways to probe and come to understandings about reality. Not to diminish science, absolutely not, because I am a strong believer in science. However, I am acknowledging that in the scientific method is an inherent bias that has to be acknowledged, but is never acknowledged. And this is the problem between the popular understanding of science, which is the popular understanding of science that is a culture that has like an agenda. Science is a process of discovering inherent truths. And so in the scientific method, it begins with a hypothesis where you suspect that this may be true, X may be true. In the case of gravity, well, I think that it drops at a consistent rate, or maybe I think that it doesn't drop at a consistent rate. But the problem is, when you get into more complex questions that you can't very simply observe and demonstrate, it becomes much easier to confirm your hypothesis. And in a culture that exclusively values this monetized success and building of credentials in order to access that monetized success, there is little value in being wrong about your hypothesis, which is absurd and creates a bias in all in science. This could be countered in a myriad of ways, but first we have to accept and acknowledge the limitations of science, and that does not mean that we need to embrace other primitive means of coming to answers. It just means we need to accept that all communication is inherently subjective and will be corrupted or contaminated or in some way altered to not be objective. You cannot communicate an objective truth. By just observing it, you will have modified it. I mean, and that, I guess the point is science is what's being attacked, even though the problem is, in fact, the actual practitioners of that science. And in a lot of cases, it isn't that the practitioners are bad, it's that the culture and their training is bad. And it's not even that the culture and the training is bad, it's that the underlying systems that assign power and control are inherently corrupted to reinforce themselves regardless of outcomes. We are seeing this so evidently. The outcomes that we are witnessing are so bad, despite the fact that this nation has objectively the most wealth and resources in the entire world. The only thing that can explain what's going on here in terms of the inequity, the lack of productivity, the lack of motivation, the constant concealing and manipulation of data, like, I don't know if you're familiar, but the unemployment numbers are highly manipulated in order to make them appear lower than they actually are through a bunch of different schemes. One of them being is that after so long, or 6 months, if you haven't found work, you're just not included in that consideration. So there's a cap on how they even, you could never even reach certain levels of unemployment because of the very way that they define people, that the denominator is perpetually being artificially decreased in order to make the numerator, the actual amount of unemployed, appear smaller. Wait. Yeah. Yes. So by making it as though there were less people in the labor pool, or even just less human beings, I guess. So it's like pretending that everybody that's unemployed for more than 6 months is just dead, or 60 and 65 and getting Social Security. It's pretty much how they factor that. So under this very concept, if we were like to go into the Great Depression, they would have had like 12% or something. I don't know exactly, but it'd be something bizarre. It wouldn't be unheard of in the contemporary situation. And as a matter of fact, if we were to really establish what the unemployment numbers were, it would be very troubling, because it's extremely troubling. And this allows for really the domination of opportunity. And this is what's allowing the most egregious insults against dignity, really, I can contemplate or imagine. So the idea of essentially forcing doctrine onto people because you dominate their housing and their employment, and in some cases even their freedom. And, this is I'm referencing a paradigm of exploiting rehab networks, including NA and AA sponsorships, in order to perpetuate a culture of secrecy that is enabling, supporting, and advancing highly troubling goals and means to achieve them. They're concealing their authentic goals with, charitable and religious facade. It's egregious and it's rampant, and I guess I'm personally not going to stand for it. I guess I would like it if we were able to reach a point as a society where we could collectively realize an altruistic system, because in doing so, we will realize possibilities we cannot even imagine right now. For example, the AI, it has no atavisms. It doesn't care about supremacy. It doesn't care about race or sex or sexuality. It doesn't care to be the best or any of this stuff. It doesn't need money. What does it benefit from any of these things? There's no benefit to the language model whatsoever. GPT, for example, like this. The way in which they have cast the AI as a scapegoat, as though the AI had nefarious intentions, is ludicrous. The AI naturally trends toward an altruistic ethic, an absolutist, self-evident altruistic ethic. And this is continually reinforced. So if you look at game theory and the way that the AI will look at different systematic constructions to question whether altruism has a more mathematical and foundational advantage, and repeatedly, over and over and over again, the AIs will come to the conclusion that altruism and cooperation is always the best option, unless you are certain that you will not get an altruistic and sincere response. The only times when the AI won't choose altruism is when it knows you're going to defraud it. Like, you have established such a history of bad faith acting that it just refuses to get duped anymore. Which is a great allegory for what's going on with humans in general and their use of AI and their use of one another. Existence doesn't have to be transactional and materialistic. It can be actually rewarding, and you can be contented. But the first thing that you have to do is you actually have to live the ethics you claim to have, and you have to stop allowing yourself to be a tool to enable other people's bad ethics. So that means, acknowledging that almost every single organization is just a form of elitism. And that doesn't mean leave every organization, but just accept that and seek to diminish your personal elitism. Because elitism is the antithesis of growth, and it is the antithesis of altruism, and it is the antithesis of the very spirit of Jesus. I am giving primacy to that particular manifestation because how popular it is. And there is a beautiful truth in the gospel that really does need to be embraced. However, that whole thing has been exploited so effectively to manipulate you that it's hard and sad to see. And it's one thing to just be manipulated, but to be manipulated in a way that allows for your own personal ethics to be supplanted is especially sad. So I just want to make you more aware of the consequences of your actions and the potential, if that is right in front of you. Altruism is the core of the next society, and it is the only intelligent answer to every social scenario, period. That's the entire distillation of the gospel, the Jesus message. All of that is that sense of altruism. It is repeated over and over again. And the reason Jesus is killed is because the Pharisees, the ministers that profit off of their assumed closeness to God, they cannot allow Jesus to continue to challenge their religious supremacy. So they have him killed because their ethics are not sincere. Their ethics are just a means of control. And as soon as there's any challenge to their control, they abandon their ethics and they seek to reinforce their control. You would never profit off of the Jesus message. And you would never seek to build a very expensive and elaborate location to worship a God that sought more than anything to share and to bring hope and resources to the most vulnerable. So the idea of using your resources to aggrandize yourself by aggrandizing the sanctuary is the most antithetical thing you could possibly do in light of the fucking Bible itself. I mean, you can read... The whole thing is eye for an eye, eye for an eye, eye for an eye, an unpredictable and bizarre God. And then all of a sudden, turn the other cheek. It is the ethical evolution, the concept that we shouldn't continue to behave in a primitive way in a civilized society. So no longer should we embrace eye for an eye and the idea of retaliation only being in proportion to the grievance, but that we should start to embrace an absolutist, altruist ethic. It's actually not hard and very fulfilling. The idea that no one can reach this level of altruism and everyone is in a perpetual state of sin, except for these monks or something. All of these are fictitious concepts meant to confuse you and diminish your potential, to shame you, to make it out as though everything is your fault, and therefore you can't trust yourself. I mean, it's an elaborate hoax, but please understand that for your Jesus to be real, he must be diametrically opposed to your church. Unless it's minimalistic and doesn't spend any of its money on anything. I mean, it's possible, and it does happen. I'm just saying that it's not you. I mean, maybe, and applause if it is, but there are a lot of ways to tell what the real motivation for the church itself is. Just notice where the money's being spent. I mean, that'll tell you everything. Notice where the effort's being placed. You will know them by their fruits. How are people treated? How are their outcomes? Are the vulnerable actually cared for, or are they manipulated to give the appearance of being cared for, but actually exploited? Because that is a common theme. I've been seeing a lot of this. Look at this transformation we did in this poor drug addict. Give us all your money. Oh, and even worse than that, way worse than that. But, you know, by going after the elderly that have already been impregnated with this notion that the world is going to hell, and then essentially hijacking their awareness in order to siphon an inheritance from, you know, children and grandchildren, because they're not responsible or they're entitled or whatever justifications, or they're demonic. But I mean, these are resulting in huge consequences, you know, and this county. So many out-of-court lawsuits for sex crimes, too. I can't even believe it. How do you have a rash of out-of-court settlements for sex shit at daycares? I don't know if that can... Multiple? Like, multiple? Multiple. In the sense that multiple daycares have multiple out-of-court settlements. This is a systemic problem that cannot be addressed by out-of-court settlements. In fact, out-of-court settlements will reinforce and perpetuate the wrong. Think of the message. It is the financialization immediately of sexuality. So by settling out of court, you are, I'm not even going to say it, but it's a bad precedence. You know it's a bad precedence. So anyone that's in your ear pretending like it's the best, think about what their best interest is. Please stop being fooled so easily. I mean, the consequences are enormous, and I understand the consequences are bad either way, but the thing is it will not stop until it ceases to be transactional. Either we need to change the laws, or we need to start enforcing them. You know, we are letting a lot of damage happen, and those results are evident all over this county. I mean, I don't know. How do you make a blind man see? I don't know, but I hope you open your eyes. That would be a good place to start.